Let's have some points.
Okay. Let's do this. Too much talk or too little? On this lake, there are enough mosquitoes to satisfy frogs and enough ducks to make the water come to life. When I talk to the woman I love, I say twice as much as I want, which is half as much as she needs. I see you empathize. Some days I get drunk on what is said. Other days, close to death from what is not. I was meant to be born in some other time, when old men died with hardly a word spoken. A sentence would have been like a fish I caught and brought to the table. We'd both just stare at it. This is a weird poem that actually came from this being here at this place as well years ago. It's called Kitchen Knives. It's an ominous little poem that I don't understand exactly why Robert likes it so much, but the sun throws itself off the water and looks into the window the way a man looks into his wife's kitchen. He sees the bread and the bowls, and his eyes beg for something he has never learned to ask for. She complains that there isn't enough money, milk, butter, conversation, tenderness to bake what he is hungry for. When a man sees that he's not going to get what he's hungry for, he looks at the knife, the large one, lying on the cutting board. His wife says, "Will you hand me the knife?" He does. And then he walks out to the dock and ties a weight to his fishing line. One more. It's called A Thunderstorm in Mentone. The wind is different tonight. The leaves on the trees move easily. Summer rain cleans the horses grazing the wet grass on the pasture across the road. I saw lightning for the first time in months. It looked like a ragged tuning fork, and I felt the thunder roll through my body. Today, in a house 100 miles away, I saw my father for the first time in 10 years. He sat beside me with his bare shoulder against mine as we looked at a map. Years ago, I would have wanted more to happen and felt a disappointment. But this meeting moved easily. A part of me, the part that always wanted more, felt cleaned. The lightning comes down into straight lines and then separates into its tines. A tuning fork and a father and son is like that too. We talked about mileage. Then he showed me the peas he'd grown in his garden. This is the most affection I'm going to get, I thought. Today, this amount of affection was enough. It's a true story. We hadn't seen each other in 10 years. Hadn't talked in 10 years. First thing he said to me, he said, "So how'd you get over here?" I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "What route did you take?" I said, "Well, I came down 24, went over 75, and came down, cut across." He said, "Shit." He said, "If you'd stop taking 24 and take 38, you'd cut you 10 miles off that trip." I said, "All right, I'm going to do her next time." For 30 years, when I would come home, we would talk like that. And then he would say, "I want to show you my garden now." I'd say, Dad, I don't want to go. I ain't got much time. Let's just sit down and talk and visit. You know, I'm going to be only here for a day or half a day or something. He'd go, no, that's about all I want to talk about. If you don't want to be with me out in the garden, you and your mama talk. And we would. We would. And so this time, I said, let's go see it. So that's from an old book of poems called Too Much Talk, Too Little. Read us some poems.
What do you want to do now, huh?
Let's read them some poems.
Well, I thought about, one of the things I did this year was to edit the book. Everybody has to do one every year. I edited the book for Best American Poems of '98. Of course, they lie and call it Best American Poetry in '99. That's where those things go. So I read about 400 literary magazines, and I had to choose the 75 best poems. Maybe we should do 4 of those. 2 of the people who wrote them are in this room. 2 people. And here's one of this is a trickster called Russell Edson. And he's a genius. This is called Madam's Heart. She had fallen in love with the doctor's stethoscope, the way it listened to her heart. The doctor said, "Would you like to honeymoon with my telescope? You should see how it extends itself and looks into the night for the heavenly body. Oh, but your microscope is so nearsighted. Then how about my periscope? It rises out of the mattress with a cunning eye for back doors." And he said, that's even more disgusting than the kaleidoscope, the way it fixes me with its fractured cyclops eye. Finally, the doctor holds up his stethoscope and wiggles it at her and asks, "Is Madam ready?" "Oh, yes," she sighed. That's Russell Edson. And Lewis Jenkins, we should get him down here to read. One of the best poets in America lives in Duluth, of all places to live. He's tremendous. Lewis Jenkins, 2 prose poems. All right, they're not so long. You ready for another trickster?
Yeah.
The Fishing Lure. I've spent a great deal of my life fretting over things that most people wouldn't waste their time on. Trying to explain something I haven't a clue about. It's given me that worried look, that wide-eyed staring look, the look that wild animals sometimes have, deer for instance, trying to make sense of the situation. What is that? Motionless, transfixed. The same look that's on the face of the fishing lure. Stupidity, terror. What's the right bait for these conditions? High cirrus cloud, cold front moving in. It's all a trick anyway. What is this thing supposed to be? A minnow? A bug? Gaudy paint and hooks all over? It's like bleached blonde hair and bright red lipstick. Nobody really believes it. There isn't a way in the world I'd bite on that thing. But I might swim in just a little closer. So, I got 2 poems of his in because they both had a title, 2 prose poems, so I could stick 2 in. This is called The Life of the Poet. I once believed that behind all things I did, or more often failed to do, there was a great moral purpose, or at least some coherent principle, raison d'etre. If there is such a principle, it's never become quite clear to me. Instead, over the years, I have managed to take a random selection of bad habits and herd them together into a life. Also, in order to disguise my absolute laziness, I've mastered the age-old art of appearing to be productive, when actually this is the only thing I'm doing. Republicans have suspected this all along. Someone comes up to my desk and I get busy scribbling, totally preoccupied. What? Oh, I'm sorry. In my haste to appear industrious, I find I have written and herd them together into a wife. Whoa. Anyway, that's Lewis Jenkins.
Nobody like him.
One more here by Tony Hoagland. I don't know much about him, but I found this poem. And It's about D.H. Lawrence. You know, all the intellectuals are always pissing on D.H. Lawrence. I don't know. On 2 occasions in the past 12 months, I have failed when someone at a party spoke of him with a dismissive scorn to stand up for D.H. Lawrence. A man who burned like an acetylene torch from one end to the other of his life. These individuals, whose relationship to literature is approximately that of a tree shredder to stands of old-growth forest, these people lean back in their chairs, bellies full of dry white wine and the ovum of some foreign fish, and casually dropped his name, the way pygmies with their little poisoned spears stood around the carcass of a fallen elephant. Oh, elephant, they say, you are not so big and brave today. It's a bad day when people speak of their superiors with a contempt they haven't earned. And it's a sorry thing when certain other people don't defend the great dead ones who have opened up the world before them. And though in the catalog of my betrayals, this is a fairly minor entry, I resolve, if the occasion should recur, to uncheck my tongue and say, I love the spectacles of maggots condescending to a corpse. Or, you should be so lucky in your brainy, bloodless life as to deserve to lift just one of D.H. Lawrence's urine samples to your arid, psychobiographic, theory-tainted lips. Or maybe I'll just take the shortcut between the spirit and the flesh and punch someone in the face. Because human beings haven't come that far in their effort to subdue the body, and we still walk around like zombies in our dying, burning world, able to do little more than fight and fuck and crow. Something Lawrence wrote about in such a manner as to make us seem magnificent. Wow. Is that a good poem? Yes. So, Tim is here, and Timothy Young has a poem about seeing a spider eat another one and asking his parents about war. Was that in the 60s, roughly, Tim?
About 1959 is about the time.
Would you come up and read this poem? It's called A Thread of Sunlight by Timothy.
The thread of sunlight. Where the thread of sunlight crossed the top bunk, I touched a rough-cut rafter and watched 2 spiders approach on the lumber's vertical plane. Just when my heart condensed to arachnid size, the great wounds of war opened before me. One spider limped on with the other's head in its mouth. When I asked my mother about war, she says, "Oh, you're thinking too much." And before her sentence ended, my father rushed in, chattering about the chores we'd accomplish. The magneto for the mill saw needed repair. The window trim should be painted. The outboard motors could be tuned. And if the work gets done, we might go fishing in the evening. The sun reflected off the flat lake, and I stood between my mother and my father, thinking.
Give us the last couple lines again.
The sunlight reflected off the flat lake, and I stood between my mother and my father, thinking.
Good.
Thank you.
And Thomas Smith is here. I was talking at Bennington College at a writer's thing, and I gave this as an example of the kind of poem they ought to write, and they were all pissed off.
They'll kill me. One thing I want to say about this poem is it's not, I don't think it's immediately evident on the surface because the surface is fairly small. It's just a short little poem, but it's really a poem of grief because About 3 years ago, I became a homeowner for the first time at the age of 48, and I was just sitting around and figuring it out the other day, and my father owned his own home for the first time when he was about 53. So I was a couple of years ahead of him, but I found that by suddenly entering into that kind of consummately adult economic act of closing on the mortgage, I opened my psyche to a whole lot of his old struggles and shames. Housewarming. In my dream, I was the first to arrive at the old home from church. Wind and night had forced through the cracks. I pushed inside, turned on lamps, lit a fire in the stove. Frozen oak logs stung my fingers. It was good pain. My hands reddening on the icy broom handle as I swept away snow. On Christmas Eve, I prepared a warm place for my mother and father, sister and brothers, grandparents, all my relatives, none dead, none missing, none angry with another, all coming through the woods. Thank you.
Well, John says that I should read a couple of poems and we'll all go home. It's late. And you all know that there's one lobe of the brain has feeling in it and the other lobe has words. And they're connected with the corpus callosum. And I found out a few years ago that women's corpus callosum is much thicker than men's. As Michael Meade used to say, they have a superhighway between the two brains. And men have a little country road. So it's amazing that men finish a sentence at all, actually. It really is so.
Sometimes a man will.
Yeah, so I did this little poem. I was doing a poem every morning, and I was in the motel, and I had to leave in about 10 minutes, so I knew I had to have a short poem. It's called Some Men Find It Hard to Finish Sentences. Sometimes a man can't say what he... A wind comes and his doors don't rattle. Or rain comes and his hair is dry. You know, there's a lot to keep inside and a lot to... Sometimes shame means we... Children are cruel, he's six in his hands. Anyway, that's really the end of the poem, but... which one? So, because Bob was down in New Orleans, last year we did a festival, a men's event in New Orleans. And actually it was terrifically interesting because they'd never had a men's event in New Orleans. The day we visited New Orleans, so much time has gone by. Napoleon's house, he never came, still stands in the quarter. Time sustains all the good living that Louis XVI, after his decapitation, never experienced. All the sights Andrew Jackson never saw in Pirates Alley. Ask the alligators about Heaton history. Out in the bayous, we met a small alligator named Elvis. When we stroked his throat, he waved his left claw at the world. When we stroked his throat, he waved his left claw at the world. It was really like that. So it makes you think. Alligators enjoy a world before the alphabet. I don't want to be who you are. I want to be myself, someone playing with language. Let's each be a sensualist of the imponderable. Let's each do what we want. I thread my way down alphabets to the place where Elvis is. So that's my poem.